Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The autumn sun bathed New York City in a soft but persistent light. In a crowded subway car, the air was thick with a mixture of perfumes, sweat, and morning coffee. People pressed on silently, each lost in their own thoughts, their phone, or the distracted contemplation of the passing cityscape. In the middle of the crowd, a young black girl, Maya Johnson, 17 years old, dressed in a gray sweatshirt and worn jeans, gripped the metal bar tightly to keep from wobbling. Her backpack, heavy with books and notebooks, rested on her shoulder. She had just finished her school day and longed for a moment of respite, a seat to ease her tired legs. When she finally spotted an empty seat, she cautiously walked towards it, but an older woman, Deborah Whitman, already seated, saw her coming. Deborah, well-dressed, with impeccably styled hair, designer glasses, and a matching handbag, stared at Maya with a mixture of disdain and arrogance. "Not here, young lady," she snapped, without even looking up. Maya stopped, her fingers gripping the bar tightly. She lowered her eyes but refused to answer. The crowd around her, too preoccupied with their own affairs, didn't react. Deborah, proud and convinced of her superiority, sat back down, a slight, triumphant smile on her lips. The subway continued its journey, gently jolting its passengers. But the wheel of fate had already turned. A few minutes later, Deborah felt a sudden dizziness. Her hands gripped the handrail, and she lost her balance. The train seemed to slow down in the minds of the onlookers as she toppled backward, unable to regain her footing. At that precise moment, Maya reacted. With unexpected strength and presence of mind, she grabbed Deborah's arm and held her, narrowly preventing a fall. Deborah's eyes opened wide in disbelief. Her lips trembled, unable to utter a word. The young woman she had judged, humiliated, and dismissed had just saved her in front of all the silent passengers. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a matter of avoiding a fall, but a silent lesson: goodness and courage are never measured by appearances, and karma sometimes strikes with unexpected precision, more powerful than any revenge. Deborah remained frozen, unable to move, while Maya resumed her standing position, her gaze direct, her eyes shining with dignity and calm. The carriage itself seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a moment when arrogance had just met its just consequence. Maya Johnson descended the steps of the Manhattan subway station, her heavy bag slung over her right shoulder, her headphones playing music that tried to soothe her fatigue. The corridors were crowded, but she moved forward with determination, as if each step brought her closer to a space where she could finally breathe. In the train carriage, Deborah Whitman, a businesswoman in her 50s, had just finished her phone call and placed her bag on the seat next to her. Her gaze wandered over the other passengers with that familiar mixture of arrogance and self-importance. She didn't really see the people around her, except when they disturbed her comfort zone. When Maya approached to sit down, Deborah looked up, frowned, and said coldly, "Not here, young lady." Maya froze. She felt a surge of anger and shame rising within her, but she remained calm, knowing that responding could worsen the situation. She lowered her head slightly and stood, her gaze fixed on the window. The subway started abruptly, and Deborah, convinced of her superiority, picked up her phone again. But fate had other plans. A few minutes later, the train car shook more violently, and the woman felt her legs buckle. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands gripping the metal bar tightly. Maya, though young and tired, reacted instinctively. With a swift movement, she grabbed Deborah's arm and caught her just before she fell heavily to the ground. The shock was immediate, all eyes turned towards them, speechless at this unexpected scene. Deborah blinked, frozen, unable to say a word. The girl she had rejected had just saved her. The train car seemed to hold its breath. In that suspended moment, Deborah understood, even if she didn't want to admit it, that the world could sometimes turn roles around in unexpected ways. Maya gently released her arm and stepped back, becoming silent and upright again, her dignity intact. Karma had just struck, without violence, but with a clear lesson: arrogance can be stopped by the simplicity of an act of kindness. The subway continued its journey, but the atmosphere in the car had changed. Passengers who had been absorbed by their phones or their own thoughts were now turning curious glances toward Maya and Deborah. The tension was palpable, yet unspoken. Deborah Whitman, still trembling from the near fall, clutched her bag tightly. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How had this girl, whom she had judged inferior, found the strength and presence of mind to save her? Maya, for her part, remained calm. She knew she had just done the right thing, without expecting any recognition. But deep down, a part of her couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, simple actions reveal people's true nature. When the subway stopped at the next station, Deborah jumped up. Her gaze met Maya's, and something in the girl's eyes made Deborah shudder. It wasn't fear, nor aggression, but a quiet confidence, a strength Deborah had never seen in someone her own age. "Wait," Deborah murmured, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" Maya gave a small smile. "Just someone who knows how to do the right thing." The smile was simple, but it carried an unexpected weight. Deborah felt a dull guilt wash over her. Until that moment, she had always thought her judgments were correct, that her position and appearance placed her above others. And now, a young girl, whom she had almost humiliated, had just forced her to confront her own arrogance. Before Deborah could reply, the subway started moving again. Maya, silent, headed towards the exit of the next station. But before disappearing, she cast one last glance over her shoulder. It was a look that said, "Remember that moment." Deborah remained frozen on the platform, her heart pounding, aware that she had just learned a lesson from which she wouldn't easily recover. And unbeknownst to her, this moment would trigger a series of revelations and confrontations that would change her life forever. The next morning, Deborah Whitman woke up with a strange feeling, a mixture of worry and guilt that gnawed at her from within. Images from the subway kept replaying in her mind, the young black girl, silent but resolute, who had saved her. She couldn't shake this feeling of unease. At the office, this unease turned into panic when she received an unexpected email. The subject line was simple but impactful. To Deborah Whitman, subway incident. Curious and slightly nervous, she opened the message. Inside, an anonymous account from several passengers in the train car detailed the incident, accompanied by photos discreetly taken by other passengers, the moment Deborah lost her balance and Maya caught her. The note ended with a sentence that made her face go white. "Dignity and strength are not measured by age or social status. Be careful with your judgments." Deborah's heart was pounding. The whole office was already buzzing with the rumors from the subway. Her colleagues, some amused, others shocked, were whispering amongst themselves. Deborah felt her image as a controlled and respected woman crumble. The situation was spiraling out of her control. But the karma didn't end there. During a meeting with business partners, Deborah faced an even more humiliating incident. One of her most influential clients, a critical-looking man, asked her curtly, "Ms. Whitman, can you explain why a young female passenger had to rescue you on the subway yesterday?" The room froze. Deborah blushed, unable to answer clearly. Her pride had been wounded, and this moment of public shame hit her like a slap. The murmurs in the room turned into stifled laughter, and Deborah knew then that she would have to face the consequences of her arrogance. Meanwhile, Maya carried on with her life, unaware of the turmoil she had unleashed. But every action she took that day on the subway began to reverberate around Deborah, slowly revealing that no one can escape life's lessons. Karma had begun to strike, and Deborah could no longer ignore it. The subway incident was just the beginning. A few days later, Deborah Whitman was still struggling to come to terms with the public humiliation. Every thought about the subway and the events that followed made her shudder. Her image as a powerful and respected woman was beginning to crack, and she felt that something or someone was forcing her to confront her own arrogance. That evening, as she left the office earlier than usual to escape the growing rumors in her professional circle, Deborah caught sight of a familiar figure in the building's lobby. Her heart skipped a beat. Maya Johnson stood there, straight and calm, her gaze fixed on her with a disturbing intensity. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitman." Maya's voice was soft but firm. "We are finally meeting again." Deborah, taken aback, stepped back. I don't understand." "What do you mean?" Maya stepped forward slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. "You had the opportunity to judge, to humiliate, and yet, you were saved by me. I simply wanted to make sure you understood the significance of your actions." Maya's words struck Deborah like a thunderbolt. The entire office, her colleagues, the influential clients, everything that had happened in the past few days paled in comparison to the direct confrontation with the young woman she had rejected. Her arrogance, her hasty judgment, her belief in her superiority, all of it was laid bare, exposed before the only person who had never hesitated to do what was right. I never wanted to," Deborah began, but then she fell silent. The apologies seemed insignificant in the face of Maya's calm and determined presence. Maya nodded gently. "I know. But the world doesn't forget. Respect and dignity are values that cannot be begged for, Ms. Whitman." Deborah felt her face turn crimson. She realized that karma was no longer just an abstract idea, it was now taking human form and looking straight into her eyes. In that suspended moment, Deborah understood that her life would never be the same again. She had just encountered the living consequence of her own arrogance, and the path of humility and redemption was just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind for Deborah Whitman. Every gesture, every word she uttered at the office now seemed to be scrutinized by everyone. Colleagues, who had previously feared and respected her for her authority, had begun whispering about the subway incident and the confrontation with Maya Johnson. Rumors were spreading faster than ever, and Deborah felt her reputation crumbling like sand between her fingers. One morning, as she entered the conference room for a crucial meeting with investors, she discovered that an email had been sent to all participants, including her most influential clients. It featured, in an ironic tone, photos from the subway, the exact moment she had almost fallen and Maya had saved her. The accompanying text wasn't aggressive, but it was enough to embarrass her. Some lessons come in unexpected forms. The meeting began, and Deborah felt the weight of everyone's gaze upon her. The investors, usually polite and neutral, exchanged knowing smiles and discreet nods, as if to underline the sudden vulnerability of the woman who had always seemed untouchable. This professional humiliation was soon followed by personal setbacks. Deborah received anonymous calls reminding her of her arrogance, and even her social life seemed to reflect her past mistakes. Her friends, who once praised her for her confidence, began to criticize her for her coldness and hasty judgment. But Deborah, despite everything, still refused to fully acknowledge the weight of her actions. She thought she could fix the situation through control and hard work, unaware that Maya had silently set in motion a process of karmic lessons that no amount of manipulation could stop. One evening, as she was walking home, Deborah saw Maya again, this time on the sidewalk across from her building, waiting patiently. The mere sight of her was enough to send shivers down her spine. The young girl was calm, motionless, but her presence seemed to fill the space with an almost supernatural force, as if Deborah's every move was now being watched by this implacable figure of silent justice. In that moment, Deborah understood that karma was no longer just an abstract concept, it was now taking a tangible and inescapable form in her life. Every choice, every judgment, every act of arrogance would be confronted, and there would be no escape. Deborah Whitman thought her problems were limited to the office and her public reputation, but she was sorely mistaken. That evening, when she returned home, she found her house strangely silent. Her husband, Charles Whitman, was sitting in the living room, looking preoccupied. "Deborah," he began softly, "we need to talk." Her heart sank. Charles, usually patient and understanding, seemed disappointed and irritated for the first time. "I heard what happened on the subway, and then all these rumors at the office. You can't keep ignoring how you treat people." Deborah opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Charles's words were true, and for the first time, she had to confront her own arrogance, not in public, but within her own family. Shame rose within her like a relentless wave. As she tried to come up with an explanation, a text message arrived on her phone. The screen displayed a simple but chilling message. Every action has a consequence. Look around you. It was Maya. The young woman had found a way to remind Deborah that karma wasn't confined to the subway or the office. It had now penetrated her most intimate space, her personal life. That night, Deborah went to bed with a newfound unease. She realized that every act of arrogance, every hasty judgment, every refusal to respect others, was now being confronted by a force she could neither control nor ignore. She knew that Maya was not simply an ordinary girl, she had become the living embodiment of justice and silent retribution in her life. Early the next morning, Deborah awoke with a strange resolve. She had to change, understand, and fix her mistakes before it was too late. But she didn't yet know that karma had already planned to go much further than she could imagine, and that Maya still had many lessons to teach her. A few days later, Deborah Whitman attended a prestigious reception hosted by her company. She hoped to regain control of her reputation and demonstrate that the subway incident had had no lasting impact on her professional life. But fate, and Maya, had other plans. No sooner had Deborah entered the room than she felt the atmosphere change. Conversations had ceased as she approached, and worried or mocking glances were fixed upon her. On a large screen, projected by mistake or by someone wanting to emphasize the irony of the situation, a photograph of the subway appeared, the one where Maya was catching up with her. The silence that followed was deafening. One guest then dared to whisper aloud, "It's incredible, you were saved by that young girl and you went on to..." He didn't finish his sentence, but the message was clear. The entire room understood. Deborah's face flushed, and she felt her legs buckle. Her self-control, which she thought unshakable, had just cracked in front of everyone. As she tried to regain her composure, Maya appeared behind her, motionless, as if silently watching over the scene. The girl's mere presence made Deborah tremble. She understood that it wasn't the crowd that embarrassed her, but Maya's sharp conscience that made each public humiliation all the more powerful. For the first time, Deborah realized that her attempts to cover up her mistakes were futile. Karma didn't wait for her to be ready, nor for her to make excuses. Every past act of arrogance, every hasty judgment, every humiliation inflicted on others was now manifesting itself publicly and inevitably. The reception ended in a mixture of whispers and lingering glances, and Deborah left the room, her heart heavy and her mind troubled. She knew this was only the beginning. Maya's karma would continue to intensify, not only in her professional life but also in her personal life, forcing her to face all the consequences of her actions. That night, alone in her car, Deborah realized that true control did not come from wealth, authority, or social status, but from humility and respect for others, lessons that Maya taught her relentlessly. A few days after the humiliating reception, Deborah Whitman felt as if the whole world was conspiring against her. Every step she took in her daily life was accompanied by a sense of scrutiny and judgment. But the real ordeal came when she received an unexpected message. "Let's meet tomorrow at the Central Park at 6 p.m. Deborah felt her heart clench. Maya Johnson wanted to meet her, alone, face to face. The idea of coming face to face with the girl who had turned her life upside down worried her as much as it terrified her. But she knew she couldn't run away any longer. The next day, the Central Park was bathed in an orange light, the setting sun casting long, dramatic shadows on the paths. Deborah arrived early, her hands trembling slightly. And then she saw her, Maya, standing calm and still, her gaze fixed on her. "Hello, Mrs. Whitman," Maya said with a quiet smile. "Thank you for coming." Deborah took a deep breath, trying to hide her anxiety. I suppose you want to tell me again what I did wrong." Her voice betrayed a mixture of frustration and fear. Maya shook her head slightly. "No. I'm here to show you that you always have a choice. You can continue to hide behind your arrogance and power, or you can learn. Every action has a consequence, yes, but you can still decide to change." The weight of those words struck Deborah like a revelation. Everything she had experienced, the subway, the office, the reception, the family tensions, was merely a reflection of her own past choices. Maya wasn't there to punish, but to teach, to show that justice could be silent yet relentless. Deborah lowered her head, tears welling up involuntarily. I understand. I never wanted to be. It's not a question of wanting or not wanting, Maya interrupted. It's a question of conscience. You can still fix your mistakes. But you have to start now. The silence of the park enveloped the two women. Deborah felt a wave of humility and clarity wash over her. For the first time, she understood that true power did not come from controlling others, but from the ability to respect, listen, and act with integrity. Maya took a step back, giving Deborah space to absorb the lesson. Remember this moment, she said softly, because this is only the beginning of your true transformation. Deborah remained alone, her gaze fixed on Maya as she walked away. She knew that her life would never be the same again and that every future choice would be influenced by this encounter, by this confrontation that had revealed the true power of karma. After her confrontation with Maya in the park, Deborah Whitman began to reflect deeply on her life. For the first time, she looked at her past choices honestly, admitting her mistakes, her self-importance, and her arrogance. She understood that her reputation, her authority, and her wealth meant nothing if they were based on fear and the judgment of others. At the office, she slowly began to change. She listened to her colleagues more, valued their ideas, and offered genuine appreciation. The mocking whispers and stifled laughter didn't disappear immediately, but Deborah felt that she was now acting authentically, rather than out of obligation or fear of losing her status. However, karma had not yet delivered its final lesson. One morning, a major project she had been leading for months was suddenly cancelled by a key partner, citing protocol and ethical issues she had long ignored. The shock was brutal, a part of her career seemed to crumble. Deborah felt panic rising within her, but a memory of the park surfaced in her mind. Maya's words, "Every action has a consequence. You can still correct your mistakes." She understood that it was not a punishment, but an opportunity. This loss, although painful, was a chance to rebuild on fairer and more humane foundations. In the weeks that followed, Deborah reached out to several people she had ignored or treated with disdain in the past. She offered sincere apologies, sought to help her colleagues, and even strangers she encountered in her daily life. Every act of kindness, every gesture of humility seemed to lessen the tension surrounding her. Then, one evening, Deborah received a final message from Maya. "You've started to understand. The rest is up to you. Keep going down this path." Deborah smiled, a new and profound emotion washing over her. She knew she still had much to learn, but she had crossed the most difficult barrier, recognizing her own arrogance and deciding to transform it into a strength for good. Karma had struck hard, but it had also offered redemption. Deborah Whitman finally understood that true power did not come from dominating others, but from dominating oneself and acting with respect and dignity. A few weeks after the changes in her life, Deborah Whitman attended a charity gala organized to support educational programs for underprivileged youth. She was calmer, more attentive to others, and every gesture she made reflected a newfound humility. As she crossed the room, she caught sight of Maya Johnson, standing near the stage, a slight smile on her lips. It was a suspended moment. The young girl she had once rejected and humiliated was now there, symbolizing not only justice but also the transformation possible for those who are willing to learn. Maya stepped forward and whispered, "You've made great progress, Deborah. But remember, every day is a new lesson." Deborah nodded, grateful and humble. "Thank you, Maya. You've shown me more than I could ever have learned on my own." Then, unexpectedly, one of the gala's most influential guests, impressed by the humanitarian initiatives Deborah was now actively supporting, approached her and offered her the opportunity to lead a nationwide project, giving her a far greater chance than any she had previously missed. Fate, it seemed, was now rewarding those who acted with integrity and respect. Deborah finally realized that karma wasn't just a punitive force, it could also be a guide, a light pointing toward redemption and justice. Maya, as the catalyst for this change, had transformed her life. And as the young woman walked away into the crowd, Deborah knew she had reached a turning point. Fear and arrogance had been replaced by responsibility and conscience. The gala ended, but the message remained: every action, every judgment, every act of arrogance has consequences. And sometimes, these consequences appear in the most unexpected ways, offering us a second chance to become the best version of ourselves. Deborah Whitman smiled, looking at the crowd around her. She hadn't just survived karma, she had learned a profound and lasting life lesson. And deep down, she knew that meeting Maya Johnson would forever be etched in her memory as the moment everything changed.